Welcome back to Season 3 of the Corporate Gossip Podcast. I hope you guys had a great summer. We spent ours in an Olympic-sized swimming pool filled with corporate tea. Before we start, I get to do my favorite thing, thank the people who supported the podcast since our last episode, or at least the people who left their name. We've got Whitney Fisher at KennyV727, David Rawheiser, Daniel Fosco, Anastasia, and Amy Wilson. Thank you! If you want to support the podcast and get a shout out, you can do so at the Buy Me a Coffee link in our show notes. This season, we also have a wish list you can fund, including a tip jar for producer Mike, who has to sit in a room with Adam and I while we rant for hours at a time. This season, we're also putting some extra content on Instagram. I know most of you follow us on TikTok, but if you follow us at Corporate Gossip on Instagram, you'll see pictures from the episode and other extra content. And one final reminder, if you haven't already, please rate and review this podcast on Apple and Spotify. Okay, here's the show. Far off the southern coast of England, a storm descended on the waters of the Celtic Sea. Sloshing ocean and towering waves surrounded the 19 men aboard the Tenacious, a 61-foot sailing yacht skippered by television tycoon Ted Turner. They were among 303 yachts competing in the 1979 Fastnet race, and Ted Turner was defending his record, having just won the America's Cup 2 years prior. The crew, as battered as the sails rippling above their heads, were fueled by fear and adrenaline, but their leader was steadfast at the wheel. Just then, a rogue wave surged from the depths of the ocean floor. The ship's navigator was thrown from the cockpit and slammed into the wheel with such force that he bent the metal railing and lost his grip on the ship's only radio, watching helplessly as it disappeared into the darkness. The storm, which struck with the force of a B-52 attack, was unrelenting, punishing their boat with 70-mile-per-hour winds throughout the night as they fought for control of the boat and the race course. Turner was steadfast.
"I was more afraid of losing than I was of dying,"
he recalled after the race. Tenacious was the first to reach the finish line at the port city of Plymouth, and a crewman leapt off the boat to the race office to find out their official time. He returned, pale as a ghost.
"My God, there's a crowd of people up there and they're all crying and ask if you've heard anything about their husbands or their boyfriends. It's like a tragedy here."
The crew's celebration turned to anxiety as the true toll of the terrors they faced the night before were revealed.
15 sailors taking part in the 1979 Fastnet race died when storms ripped through the fleet of 303 yachts, which had sailed from Cowes a few days earlier.
They were en route to the Fastnet Lighthouse, the most southerly point of Ireland, when the storm hit. Only 85 yachts were to finish the race. 5 sank and 19 were abandoned.
The 1979 Fastnet race was the deadliest yacht race in history. The fact that Ted Turner's team not only survived, but won, was a story of triumph over adversity, and also a story of men who put themselves and others at great risk for the sake of an ego boost, but I'll save that rant for another day. Ted reflected on his experience this way.
"Like any experience, whenever you come through it, you feel better. We're not talking about the other people who died, but to be able to face it all and come through it is exhilarating. Sailing in rough weather is what the sport is all about."
This contemplation may seem nonchalant, but it was typical of Ted. For most people, an event like this would be a central plotline in their biography, but for Ted, it's barely a footnote. He was Captain Outrageous, collecting unique experiences like figurines, creating the first superstation and buying the Atlanta Braves in 1976, winning the America's Cup in 1977, launching CNN in 1978, and of course, the Fastnet race in 1979. Many call Ted a revolutionary and a disruptor, in a genuine way, not like how it's thrown away to describe nerds digging tunnels in Vegas. By the early 1990s, he'd become one of the most powerful men in the media business. A prolific philanthropist, he was Time's Man of the Year in 1991. One might even mistake him for a ravishing movie star as he paraded across the red carpet with his new wife, Jane Fonda, on his arm. But Ted's whimsical charm hid a kind of psychic darkness he carried with him. Memories from a traumatic childhood haunted him. He was mercilessly codependent and never able to be alone. He was paranoid and obsessed with growing his empire to satisfy his feelings of inadequacy, caused by years under the thumb of an abusive father who became an abusive boss. It was these unresolved traumas that would undermine his success and ultimately leave him alone and somewhat powerless, like a gorgeous ship with a fatal puncture, abandoned by its crew. This is the Corporate Gossip Podcast. Ted Turner, Captain Outrageous. Speed. Welcome back to the Corporate Gossip Podcast. I'm your host, Becca Platsky, CPA Scorned. I'm here with my co-host,
Data Analytics Playboy, Adam Platsky,
and producer Mike. Today, we are going to talk about Ted Turner, the founder of CNN. Mike, what did you, like, growing up in Atlanta, what did you know about Ted Turner?
Ted was anointed right next to Jesus Christ himself.
Oh, really?
Yeah, everyone knew about Ted. I heard stories about Ted that driving through rundown parts of Atlanta in his limo on his way to CNN headquarters, he started buying up plots of land because he didn't like how gross they looked, and he would just like tear down shitty old buildings and turn them into gravel lots because he didn't want to look at bumpy buildings on his way to work. That's how much influence and money he had.
Yeah, Ted owned all of Atlanta. I mean, well, every sports team. He owned the Braves, at one point the Hawks, the Thrashers, the little forgot about hockey team of Atlanta. And then I think it's important to also think about the entertainment that Ted has brought us, which is TNT, TBS, CNN, TCM. He started broadcasting the WWF, brought us Cartoon Network, had hands in MGM, that's Legally Blonde, RoboCop, War Games.
Well, plus rival WWF. He started WCW, World Championship Wrestling,
right, WCW.
To try to take down WWF because they were doing so good.
He's the reason that we watch The Christmas Story every year. So before TBS bought the rights to The Christmas Story, it wasn't as popular as it is today. And he kind of turned this sleeper hit into what it is. It's American Christmas canon. He really is. He's an iconic media mogul. He created, like you said, TBS and CNN, the first 24-hour news network, the first 24-hour network in general. His legacy is honestly complicated. I normally go into these episodes like feeling really strongly about these CEOs. I feel very strongly that they're poo-poo heads through and through. But Ted Turner is a tough figure. Like, on the one hand, like, he's so charming. He seems genuinely nice. Oh, and
yeah, I wanted to ask you that, but I figured this was a good way to bring it up. Like, the guy was good looking, so
a total smoke show.
Yeah,
for sure. But now you look at his Twitter feed. Now he's in his late 80s, early 90s, and his Twitter feed isn't filled with like the libertarian ramblings of a rich chump. It's delightful. Like, it's nice pictures of wildlife and quotes about nature. But on the other hand, he was the manic architect of this never-ending news cycle. He brought us the Trump presidency in some ways. He calls himself a socialist at heart, and then he's shutting down unionization efforts at his companies. So his life is conflicting. So let's go down to the corporate tea collection of Ted Turner, and I'm curious what you think of him by the end. So you ready for the first piece of corporate gossip?
Yes, bring it.
All right. The first piece of corporate gossip is in terms of corporate villains. We have David Zaslav, who we're going to talk about next week. He's the straight up evil sociopathic type. But then you have the other corporate villain in the story, Ted Turner. He's like the villain with the heart of gold. Mike, you can go to the next slide. And remember, guys, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see some of the visual aids that we'll be referencing and pictures of Ted's life throughout the episode. Or if you're not watching on YouTube, you can click on the link in the show notes and you can go to the Substack article where you'll see all the pictures that we're talking about. So here is Ted Turner standing in a lectern. I think this is on one of the premiere dates of CNN. So just for reference, a lot of this research comes from an incredible 2001 profile by The New Yorker called The Lost Tycoon. It was written by Ken Auletta. And then I also read this book, Up All Night, Ted Turner, CNN, and the Birth of 24-Hour News. This is by Lisa Napoli. This one you can find in our bookshop.org storefront. So let's get into the contradiction cowboy himself. In my opinion, he's like an other dimensional Donald Trump, Kathy Hilton hybrid. And I'll say the reason I use that Donald Trump, Kathy Hilton hybrid is because everybody will say this about him. He just says anything that comes, there is absolutely no filter. Anything that he thinks, he says immediately. So former director of TBS said, he's a mixture of genius and jackass. I think Ted could have run for president of the United States if it were not for the jackass side. And that jackass side of Turner, in his own words, is, I don't have any idea what I'm going to say. I just say what comes to mind. Jerry Levin is a character that we'll meet later. He was involved in the Time Warner acquisition of CNN. He says, Ted is by far the most interesting person I've ever met. How he reacts to things, it's as if a child were speaking without any social inhibitions. He'll just speak out loud what may be going through someone's mind, and he'll say it to everybody. And I think that's beautiful characteristic. He says he's angelic. The whole world is socially constrained. I love and respect this about Ted. Gail Evans, a senior executive at Turner Broadcasting, says that Turner is always winking. Rupert Murdoch called him nuts, and Turner challenged Murdoch to a fist fight twice, once in 1983 and again in 2003. And I don't know, by the time this episode comes out, we'll see if the Musk-Zuckerberg fight actually happens. But what is it with these media?
These guys who have no experience fighting, wanting to fight. Well, Zuck has experience fighting, but like, who do you got, really?
Yeah.
I think take a look at Ted Turner and tell me you don't have Ted Turner.
Oh my God.
Rupert
Okay.
Murdoch.
Ted Turner, Rupert Murdoch in their prime, Zuckerberg and Musk. I mean, Zuckerberg probably would beat them all, but I think Ted Turner would stand a good chance. So let's dive into his upbringing. Mike, you can go to the next picture. And I'll preface this by saying the way that boomers will like casually talk about the abuse that they suffered as kids, and then at the end be like, no, I don't need therapy. Like, I totally worked it all out myself.
It made me who I am today, and that's why I'm successful.
Yeah. So Turner's born in 1938 in Cincinnati to Robert Edward Ed Turner Jr. and Florence Rooney. He had a sister, Mary Jane, who was 3 years younger than he was. So Ed ran a successful billboard business, also known as an outdoor advertising business. Like, I couldn't conceptualize what they meant by outdoor advertising.
I thought it was like outdoor goods. Like they were selling like camping gear. I was like,
that's what I thought too, but it's billboards.
What a niche.
Yeah. It took me like 20 pages into this book to realize he's talking about billboards. But
That's
Ed,
actually crazy.
that we didn't know that.
Yeah, outdoor advertising is synonymous with billboards. I only looked at billboards and I know that's called outdoor advertising.
I thought they meant advertising camping goods.
Space blankets.
Yeah. I was like, I was picturing in my head, I was like tents and stuff on billboards. I was like, wow, I can't believe that's like such a niche market.
Yeah, you could become a millionaire.
Camping goods.
So write in, let us know if you were equally as confused as we are or if we really are that dumb.
I think you had to read it. Reading it.
Yeah.
Now saying it out loud sounds stupid.
I don't know. Anyway, so Ed is running this business. He's super driven and he's working a lot more than he's at home. He's kind of haunted by the memory of his own father. His father was a cotton farmer in Mississippi. He lost his farm in the Great Depression, and refusing to declare bankruptcy, he became a sharecropper. And without getting too much into it, it's basically a legalized form of slavery. And I can't imagine Ted's father growing up having a very good childhood either. Growing up, Ted's dad would warn him that Franklin D. Roosevelt and Harry Truman were communists and that the communists would take over America and execute anyone with more than $50 in their pocket. For years, Ted would never carry around more than $49. And Ed, I mean, he was a shitty dad. Like, he, just based on the biography, right? He's leaving home for multi-day drinking and sex benders. He drinks so much that he'd start bar fights and then like immediately check into rehab. He'd sober up and he'd return home, get back to work, and then just like resume that cycle again. Trigger warning for the next part. I'm going to describe child abuse. This comes from the New Yorker article. And this story has honestly kind of haunted me since I read it. So Ed was often drunk, says the article, and would fly into a rage when Ted disobeyed. He frequently beat him, sometimes with a wire coat hanger. He would untwist it until it was straight, like a whip, and then hit his son, exclaiming, "This hurts me more than it hurts you." When this didn't seem to tame Ted, he reversed the punishment. pulling down his pants, lying down, and ordering his son to administer the lashings. With tears streaming down his cheeks, Ted obeyed. It was the most painful thing I ever did in my entire life, Ted recalls, giving his father credit for understanding that that would be a more effective punishment than beating me. So next, what do you think Ed does? Go to a Buddhist retreat? Considers an alternate parenting style? No. He joins the Navy during World War II. He takes his wife and daughter, Mary Jane, with him to the Gulf Coast. He leaves Ted behind, a school-age kid, going to boarding school. He went to boarding school because Ed thought that boys who spent too much time with their mothers would become too feminine. And Ted hated boarding school. He says, I was hurt. I didn't want to go off so young. It was like a prison. You couldn't leave campus. He added, there was no parents there, no mom, no dad. And here comes the classic boomer historical revision about their own upbringing. And I'm not saying like you have to rag on your dad, but just the way that boomers will twist these stories of abuse when they're not.
It might not be twisting. It could be that he's just buried
like that's how he's coping with it.
Yeah.
But it's just sad because you'll see the way that this experience impacts him throughout his life. So later in life, Turner defended, even romanticizes his harsh father, saying that he deliberately instilled insecurity. He thought that people who were insecure worked harder, and I think that's probably true. I don't think I ever met a super overachiever who wasn't insecure to some degree. A super overachiever is somebody who's never satisfied. And unfortunately, Ted's trauma wasn't over yet. He wanted to break away from the family business and become a missionary. But when he was 15, his sister, Mary Jane, who was 12, contracted lupus. This is a disease which attacks the immune system in the body. And the way he describes it is absolutely horrific. She's completely racked in pain. She's vomiting this is again from The Lost Tycoon. Ted regularly came home and held her hand, trying to comfort her. He prayed for her recovery. She prayed to die. After years of misery, she succumbed. Ted lost his faith. I was taught God was love and God was powerful, and I couldn't understand how somebody so innocent could be made to suffer so. So eventually he leaves home. He goes to Brown, where he was a wayward student, and that's to say the least. He gambled, he got into noisy arguments, defending the South, defending war as a means of ridding the planet of the weak, defending nationalism. He kept a rifle in his room, and sometimes he poked it out of the dormitory window and fired off a round or two. He partied and drank too much. Yeah, it doesn't get better. He'd sing Nazi songs outside the Jewish fraternity. He'd prank black students with menacing notes on their door. One classmate observed, despite, quote, his basic racist tendencies, his chauvinistic approach to women, his elitist view of society, and his fascist political ideology, Ted was likable, even enjoyable. He's an asshole.
Racism is a non-starter these days. Yeah. And it's just like, well, once you look past the racism, the chauvinistic behavior, he's really a great guy.
Heart of gold.
Heart of gold. Just look past that.
So he's actually studying classics while he's at Brown, and his dad from Cincinnati is still micromanaging his life. His dad writes him a letter when he finds out his mastering in classics, and do you want to read it?
Yeah, I'll read it. This is me as Cincinnati father, Ed Turner. I'm appalled, even horrified that you have adopted classics as a major. As a matter of fact, I'm almost puked on my way home today. I suppose everybody has to be a snob of some sort, and I suppose you'll feel that you're distinguishing yourself from the herd by becoming a classical snob. In my opinion, it won't do much to help you learn to get along with people in this world. I think you're rapidly becoming a jackass, and the sooner you get out of this filthy atmosphere, the better it will suit me. I hope I'm right. You are in the hands of the Philistines, and damn it, I sent you there. I'm sorry.
Eventually, Ted drops out of Brown because, to your point earlier, he's caught with a girl in his dorm. And I just love that, he's a racist, he's a bigot, he's harassing students, which, fine, we can look past that. But having a co-ed in your dorm? You're out of here.
You know, the Ivy League is leaps and bounds ahead in their thinking, right?
That's right. That's right. Anyway, he joins the family billboard business. Worst thing he could be doing. Absolutely toxic. So here's Ted on his wedding day with his first wife. He's 22 years old. I think she's a very similar age. And this is 1960. This is Judy Gale Nye. She's the daughter of a prominent sailor. So what do you think? When he's 22 years old, do you think he cleaned up his act, became a married man, just like Jax, right? I'm married now. I'm a family man.
Number one guy in the group.
Number one guy in the group. No. So Judy gives birth to a daughter, Laura Lee, ironically enough, while Ted is off sailing. Sailing is about to become a huge part of the story. And even when he's home, he's still out late night partying, coming home with lipstick on his collar. I didn't even know that was a real thing. So she files for divorce 2 years later. A few weeks later, after she files for divorce, she finds out that she's pregnant with their son, Robert Turner, too. Eventually, they do try to reconcile, but when Ted rammed his wife's boat in order to win a sailing competition, Judy finally called off the marriage. The things that finally are the straw that breaks the camel's back for Ted Turner are just not the things that you would expect.
Well, what's great to see is that, even back then, a new baby will solve all your marital issues.
At least for a couple years.
Yeah.
Anyway, he meets his next wife, Jane Shirley Smith, the first Jane he'd marry, at a Barry Goldwater campaign in Atlanta, and they had 3 kids. I mean, he didn't do much in terms of breaking familial patterns with his second family. His children would remember sudden mood changes and temper that would terrify them. So professionally, Ted is still working for the family business, and he's also picking up the slack for his dad, who's struggling mightily with depression. Ed's continuing to self-harm, smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. What's that, 60 cigarettes?
Yeah, and it's probably unfiltered.
Yeah. Pills. I don't know what you're taking at that time. Ludes, probably. He ends up in treatment at a psychiatric hospital in Connecticut. And when he returns in 1961, he makes a big decision for the business. He pays $4 million, which is about $40 million today, to buy a few Southeast divisions of the outdoor advertising company, Billboard Company, making his branch the biggest outdoor advertising company in the South. And Ted's excited. He's like, great job, Dad. Like, you did it. Like, we own so much more now. This is a great move. But Ed is completely overwhelmed. He's despondent. He doesn't think he has the resources for such a big company after all. And immediately, in a panic, he goes back to the psychiatric hospital. He picks up the phone. He calls a business associate and presses him to buy the divisions back from him, which the associate did, and then added in $50,000 because he felt bad about it. And honestly, this is very relatable. Like, I can relate to making a decision, feeling confident about it, and then immediately being like, holy shit, I fucked up. I'm really depressed. Like, how can I undo this? He did offload it, but it didn't help Ed's depression. He wrote to his wife, I don't want to hurt anybody. I just feel like I've lost my guts. A few months later, he died by suicide. Later, Ted would tell an autobiography, my father and I had terrible, terrible fights. It was after one of those fights, we disagreed about how the business should be run, that he blew his brains out, and I lost my best friend.
That's so crazy to say that in that way, like my dad, rather than, my dad passed away.
Right.
My dad blew his brains out.
To use those, and that's what they're talking about. The way that Ted speaks, he says things that people would never say, that people don't normally ever say. And many people find that enthralling. Like, you'll see he's a very charismatic, interesting people. You want to be around him. You want to hear what he has to say. I think interestingly and sadly, when Ed writes to his wife, I feel like I've lost my guts. That little documentary we just watched about America's Cup, you can tell Ted just really wants to do things that are brave and bold and risky. And he talks about, like, I am brave. I do things that I don't think my dad could have ever done. Mm-hmm. And I think he really prides himself on having, like, no fear, which, I mean, is good and bad. Really blessing and a curse. You want to do one more piece of corporate gossip,
let's
then
do
we'll take a
another
break?
one, then a break.
Okay. All right, the next piece of corporate gossip is, would you believe that the reason we have the 24-hour news cycle in America is because of Ted Turner's undiagnosed mania? I should add, if I haven't already, that we're not just armchair diagnosing Ted Turner. This observation has been made by many, including his ex-wife Jane Fonda, several associates, and contemporaries. But of course, the way we talk about it isn't as nuanced and thoughtful as we would have talked about it today. On the one hand, I want to be sensitive that I'm not perpetuating stereotypes around bipolar disorder or manic episodes. But on the other hand, I do think it's germane to a lot of the decisions that he's making at the time. So I'm going to try to tread as sensitively as possible while we tell this story. But obviously, if I screw up, email me. I'll make it right. I'll provide a correction. To really capture Ted's legacy, were you going to say something, by the way?
No, a lot of the diagnosing that's done, right, is by coworkers, friends, exes,
right,
things like that. I think in the documentary we saw, a lot of people were inferring that Ted was bipolar, manic.
Yeah, I think
so
he
on
was
and so forth.
diagnosed at some point later in life, and then I think he said that he didn't believe in the diagnosis. I'm not really sure where that landed, but yes, it's a pretty common descriptor of his behavior. So to really capture Ted's legacy, I found this quote from Christiane Amanpour. She says, "He is the last of the revolutionary and creative minds in our business. The idea of 24-hour news and the global news is his creation. It changed the world. It changed people's relations with their government, and Ted's business also had a human face and a moral face and a social face. It wasn't just about making money and building an empire," she said. "He's been shunted aside." And you can tell by that quote that we're going to come a long way. By the time that we do arrive at the current state of Ted's life later in this episode, we'll actually be in a sad place. So we're kind of starting in a sad place. We're going up to kind of the precipice, and then we go back down again.
Bell curve.
It is a bell curve, I suppose. But the journey from small-time billboard heir to media king to red carpet to celebrity on Jane Fonda's arm and back again to some sense of obscurity, alone, depressed. It's a wild ride. So let's get into it. You can go to the next slide. I absolutely love this picture. This is Ted Turner's and his crew on board a sailing yacht during a sailing race.
It looks like a behind the scenes of Jaws.
It does.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. So after his father's death, Ted manages to buy back the divisions that his father had sold in a panic. And soon he has dreams of building a media empire beyond just billboards. So he starts buying up radio stations in the late 1960s, first in Chattanooga, Jacksonville, then Charleston. If you're from the Atlanta area, like Mike, I'm curious if you recognize what he does next. So in the late 1960s, he buys a struggling Channel 17. And folks, I really don't like to use the word disruption. I'm going to use it sparingly, but in this case, it is warranted. I put him up there with Herb Kelleher. He's the industry genius that people like Elon Musk only wish they could be. And to give you some context to appreciate innovation, we need to go back to the state of cable TV in the late 1960s. At the time, there's a strictly limited number of broadcast channels. You got NBC, ABC, CBS, whatever. They broadcast nationally. This is based on regulation by the FCC. If you're a smaller network that wanted to get into homes, you'd have to be a network affiliate. The alternative was to do what HBO was starting to do in the early 70s, which was to carry television signals through satellite to paying customers. Ted did something different. He uses those same satellite signals to get on home television sets without a paywall. Here's Ted on a promo for Channel 17. And keep in mind, because he's a pretty small upstart, he has a really small budget for the types of shows that he can play on Channel 17. And here's one of them.
The Superstation is proud to present a highly educational and informative series on Wednesday nights, The Fall of Eagles, a chronicle of the collapse of Europe's three great dynasties prior to and during World War I.
The Fall of Eagles, Wednesdays at 10 on WTCG Atlanta.
Real appointment television.
It looks like a used car salesman trying to sell me a history movie.
So this strategy that he created would be used by other notable channels in the 70s and early 80s: ESPN, MTV, Bravo, Showtime, Discovery, The Weather Channel. So Ted's new station was eventually called TBS, Turner Broadcasting Station. You know it now as the channel that has Conan.
Conan is no longer on TBS.
Oh.
Conan has a podcast now. It's all podcast.
Okay, well, what's on TBS now?
Two Broke Girls, Friends, Big
It's a
Bang
rerun
Theory. Yeah,
central.
So it's reruns.
Syndicated television.
Yeah, it's funny because that's kind of how it started too. It's ran essentially whatever Ted could afford at the time: old movies, comedy reruns, cartoons, and the Atlanta Braves.
The Braves were god awful in the 70s. I think it was after Hank Aaron had left the team, and Ted anyway, he takes over the team in 1977, and he decides that he can do a better job managing the team. So he manages the team for one game, according to baseballreference.com. He loses, but he's so desperate. There's scenes of him calling down to Hank Aaron, asking him to come down and coach the team. And Hank's like, no, it's like hard. I can't just coach the team. So Ted's like, oh, fuck it. I'll just coach the team. Anyway, that doesn't work. But Ted is like, I think, the best owner in baseball after reading this. So here's some great quotes. So Ted attended most Brave home games. He ran out on the field to lead the fans and take me out to the ball game. Sitting behind the Braves dugout, he'd spit Red Man tobacco juice into a cup and swill a beer. And in hot weather, peeling off his shirt.
Nice.
So Ted was basically an out of control fan that owned the team.
He bought this team for $12 million.
He'd run out on the field and take his pants down and be like, somebody spank me.
It's the new promo of the week. Spank the owner.
Yeah, he bought this team for $12 million, which I think you looked up earlier. It's like $58 million.
$60 million in today's money, which is like the Mets just sold in 2020 for $2.5 billion. So even by today's standards, he's getting a crazy deal. And the Braves are one of the most, especially Atlanta now, the way it's grown, the Braves are like one of the most successful franchises, at least financially, that the MLB has.
He doesn't even know how to play baseball. Like, nowhere in his biography did it say, like, Ted was always interested in baseball. It's just, I think it was just an Atlanta thing. And he was like, I could do that. I've got an extra $12 million laying around. But maybe he wasn't good at baseball. But what he was good at is sailing. Let's go to the next page. So this Sports Illustrated cover is from the 1977 America's Cup. What would a corporate gossip episode be without a near-death experience at sea? Just like his arch nemesis, Rupert Murdoch, right? So he competed in England's 605-mile Fastnet yacht race. Deadly gales turned into a struggle for survival. Sailors were washed overboard and yachts sank. Rescuers could not find Turner and his crew, but 80 hours after they started, Turner and his crew won the race, and 19 people died.
It seems like all these rich, powerful CEO men all forget that they can't take the sea.
Yes.
It's like they're so delusional in their power. They're like, what's the sea anyway?
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh shit, bad idea. They all run off.
I hate to say it though, but Ted really could. Like, eventually in 1977, he ends up winning the America's Cup.
So when he wins the America's Cup in celebration, in typical Ted Turner fashion, he's drinking aquavit and then drinking champagne, pulls up his shirt to his neck and yells at some nearby women, "Show me your tits!"
This wouldn't be, just a spoiler alert for the future, this isn't going to be the first time he does something highly inappropriate after a yacht race. And this is kind of where he gets his nickname, Captain Outrageous. And, like, I honestly don't think that he could get away with a lot of the things he got away with. Maybe he could. I don't. He's so charming, but I really just think that it's absolutely
it would have caught up to him in college. He would have never been able to. Well, current day, all the stuff would be in it would be like college kid shoots bullets out of dorm.
Oh my god, I forget. Stop there. Yeah, I mean, really,
it doesn't work today.
No.
I'll tell you right now, if Ted Turner came out with his own brand of rum, I'm going back to drinking rum.
Yeah, I do agree. I agree with that.
I would drink Ted Turner rum right now.
You know what? I think there's a collective of Jason Aldean fans that would love what Ted Turner was doing in college. He could try that in a small town.
Okay.
I like that. That's good.
That's getting cut out.
That's getting cut. Okay.
Cut out. Rebecca's like,
Whenever I do okay. All right. So
I can talk about spanking a baby's bare bottom and then the baby spanking a back. But when you say Jason Aldean, that's going too far. Not in my Atlanta.
Not
Okay.
in my podcast studio.
Okay. Back on land with his tootsies firmly in the sand, he's building another network. Okay, so here's the situation for Ted. Up in the middle of the night, you can't fall back asleep. What are you guys doing? Looking on your phones, listening to a podcast, turning on some sleep sounds. Okay, the thing is, 1977, you can't do that. You got nothing. You got a book.
Yeah,
or a newspaper.
All you can do is chew on rope and stare out the window.
And shoot your gun out of the window. That's about
Fire
it.
off a few rounds. That'll put you to sleep.
I'm going to go sailing. Ah, damn it, it's too dark out.
Yeah, exactly. So you turn on the TV and it's the rainbow, like, static
God,
symbol.
I can't even imagine. No infomercials. Could you imagine?
No infomercials.
Like, no Ronco, rotisserie, chicken.
Right.
Set it.
Oven.
Set it.
And
Forget it.
Set it and forget it.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is pre all that. So that, quote unquote, drove Ted crazy. It made zero sense to him that television stations ceased transmission each night. So in 1974, Ted's station becomes the first U.S. television station to broadcast 24 hours a day. It would become the genesis for Ted's next project, the cable news network, also known as CNN, which premiered on June 1st, 1980.
Clinton News Network.
That's right. It was renamed.
Yeah, I think it's been renamed since.
I forgot. All right, let's take a break and we will come back with a guest appearance by Jimmy Carter. And we're back. You ready for corporate gossip number 3?
Number 3.
Okay, so the piece of corporate gossip number 3 is now it's time for Jimmy Carter to make an appearance as the empathetic king and Ted Turner's daddy figures. And by the end of this segment, Jimmy Carter will be all of our dads. So this picture is Ted Turner at an official CNN launch event in Atlanta in 1980. Suspend everything you think you know about CNN now. Here's what Ted Turner initially envisioned for the network. This is based on his 1980 mission statement. To act upon one's convictions while others wait, to create a positive force in the world where cynics abound, and to provide information to people where it wasn't available before. CNN's first seconds on air broadcasted a band playing the Star Spangled Banner. After it ended, Ted Turner yelled, "All right!" and CNN was live.
Why do we feel like the Star Spangled Banner was like the kickoff? Why everything? Everybody's like, yeah, we'll do the Star Spangled Banner, and then we'll go live.
Yeah, we really lack creativity.
Like default,
yeah,
Star Spangled Banner.
Like start the school day. Like let's like do something different.
Well, I think he originally pitched. I read in the notes of the book. He originally pitched, I'm going to smoke one cigarette down to the butt, into the camera, blow the smoke, and then go, we're live. But they opted.
I'm gonna smoke the cigarette filter first.
I'm going to smoke the cigarette down to the butt, then I'm going to eat the butt. And
Oh yeah,
say
then
we're
you're gonna
live.
zoom out, and I'm gonna be riding a bison.
2 machine guns.
And then I'm going to ask the entire audience to show me their tits.
Here's an advertisement for CNN.
America is experiencing a totally new concept in television viewing. It's the Cable News Network, and it's available to cable homes throughout the United States. Never before has television captured the immediacy of news, the thorough, up-to-the-minute coverage that it does now. The Cable News Network, available 24 hours a day.
So, based on what you know of Ted Turner so far, as he's kicking off CNN, you think he's got a good work-life balance? He basically lives in the office during the CNN years, those early CNN years. He's this type of guy that wants to hyperfixate on one thing. Maybe it's sailing, maybe it's work, maybe it's women. Right now it's producing CNN. So he's the galvanizer, the risk taker. He's living in his office. He's hurrying through the newsroom and rarely spending more than 30 seconds with anybody. Most of the staff worked 6 or 7 days a week and relied on portable toilets outside, and that employees would show up in the morning and see Ted wearing a robe or wrapped in a towel, wandering out of his office where he slept on a Murphy bed. Lou Dobbs, another CNN pioneer who was a business news anchor, remembered Turner as a drunken sailor and thought he might not be the right fellow to lead the effort. Dobbs was afraid that Turner was more of an eccentric than a visionary until he got to know him. He's a natural born leader. I once asked him the definition of a leader. He said, a leader is the ability to create infectious enthusiasm. You have a funny story about Ted's sales tactics.
Yeah, Ted's sales tactics. I found this excerpt from the article. Turner would drop to the floor histrionically to beg for business.
And for someone to spank them. Sorry.
Close.
Very close. Once telling a roomful of Southern ladies how to woo advertisers, he explained, "My daddy said, if advertisers want a blowjob, you get down on your knees." That's the kind of man we're dealing with.
I'm shocked that sexual harassment didn't come up at all in this book. Let's move to the next picture. So this is Ted Turner being interviewed at the CNN studio in Atlanta. He also had some illusions of grandeur, which manifested themselves corporately. First, Turner had something called the Doomsday Video created. It was a video recorded of a military marching band playing the hymn, "Never My God to Thee," and put in a database labeled "Hold for Release Till the End of the World Confirmed." You can find it on YouTube now, actually. At one point during the early 80s, he thought about running for president. In the mid 80s, and this is wild because it's like the saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. He makes this big business move that he then immediately retracts, just like his father did. So Ted had always talked about owning a Hollywood studio. And in 1985, without consulting his board of directors, he buys MGM Studio for $1.5 billion. That's $4.25 billion today. The consensus at the time was that he overpaid. The financing for this deal was provided by this guy. Can you go to the next slide? So the picture you're looking at now is junk bond king Michael Milken. Have you ever seen someone so terrifying?
Who also starred in the Turner classic movie Aliens Attack.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I mean, he's the most villainous looking corporate villain I've ever seen. And the deal itself was totally bogus. Milken was representing Ted, and he was also representing MGM. Generally, you're not supposed to represent both sides of a deal.
I gather that.
And 3 months after the deal, because of this massive debt load that Ted took on, he had to sell the studio back to MGM for $300 million. He bought it for $1.5 billion. He scammed Ted Turner out of $1.2 billion. Anyway, Ted Turner did eventually keep the film library, and that would ultimately become Turner Classic Movies. So, I mean, at this point, Turner's rich, but he's not rich enough to cover $1.2 billion loss. So he has to sell a pretty big chunk of the company that he still owns to other cable companies. All told, he sold a third of his financial interest in his companies and half of the board seats. Essentially, this move cost him the company. He's not able to make these unilateral decisions anymore, which might be a good thing, but any decision he makes now needs to be approved by the board. Luckily, he is able to make a really big, bold move with CNN, which was to spend a ton of money on the Gulf War. And this put CNN on the map and made it an incredibly valuable asset.
Right. So what's the bet, right? The bet is people want to see, not only Americans, but world viewers want to see live war coverage, no matter what the cost, money or, human, right? So the Gulf War essentially starts and Turner is like, all right, whatever we need to spend, let's spend it to get this war coverage. So Ted was willing to make, not only take the financial risk, but also the human risk, sending these wartime reporters correspondents to do this, and actually it created a lot of careers for a lot of these people,
and no one was killed. I mean, here's the thing. This report says, Turner is acclaimed as a different kind of businessman, one who thought about more than profit margins. But it's like, regardless of whether anybody got killed or not, you put people's lives on the line for business. I mean, I wouldn't even say it's good enough to put people's lives on the line for oil, but that's a topic for another podcast. But this to me doesn't feel like it should be lauded. It feels like it should be questioned. Like, I don't know. I'm not going to get into war coverage and the ethics of war coverage, but this to me, like a lot of things that Ted Turner does, feels like a really risky, dangerous move that just so happened to work out for him.
Well, it's also crazy, right? That war is good for, you hear this a lot, war is good for business. And it seems like it's really good for CNN.
It is good for CNN. Look at, the Ukraine war earlier this
continued.
This
still
year,
today.
Continues still today. It's very good. That's a fact. It's very good for the ratings. It's conflicting. That's news in general, right? Okay, so you guys are asking me. I know you're at home. You're pounding on the table. You're pounding on your dash. Put your hands back on the steering wheel. Now we're ready to talk about Jimmy Carter, okay? So here we have Jimmy Carter with Ted Turner at a gala celebrating Captain Planet. Did you know that Ted Turner created Captain Planet, the TV show? Remember that show? Earth, wind, water, fire, Captain Planet. That was his show. He created it.
He created it, or he just like brought it it onto the studio, or he was like, I think there should be a Captain Planet.
Let me double check, but no, created by Barbara Pyle and Ted Turner.
Wow.
By the mid-1980s, Ted is starting to grow up a little bit, in part due to his friendship with Jimmy Carter. I don't know. It doesn't ever say like how they met, but I assume it was somewhere in the Atlanta political media circle.
The Atlanta social scene.
Absolutely.
Movers and shakers only.
Yeah. Real House Husbands of Atlanta. And Turner had a lot of respect for Jimmy Carter. And it was written that Carter's views impacted Turner's politics. And the years following, he created the Turner Foundation, the TV show Captain Planet, to bring attention to environmental issues. This is my favorite part about Carter's relationship with Turner. It seems like Jimmy Carter becomes kind of a father figure to him, at least in the way that Turner would confide in Carter about specifically his love interests. He had divorced his second wife in 1988. And he's on a hunting and fishing trip with Carter at Avalon, which is Turner's estate in Tallahassee. And Turner reads in the papers that Jane Fonda was planning to divorce her husband, Tom Hayden. Turner told Carter that he had always admired Fonda as an actor and as an outspoken liberal. I think I'm going to ask her for a date, he said. And I just love that. I love the idea of them sitting on the boat and like him asking Jimmy Carter about
I don't think it was
advice.
As beautiful as you think. I think it was two not old geezers, two guys cruising for chicks.
No. Okay, you ready for corporate gossip number 4? Corporate gossip number 4 is, I love the idea that women can't be world leaders because they might start world wars on their mensies. But most of the men in power are making radical decisions based on unaddressed childhood trauma. So here's Ted and Jane in 1990. I mean, they are just...
Look at that pencil mustache.
Yeah, he is absolutely committed to the pencil mustache. From this until right today, if you ran into Ted Turner today, he'd have the same mustache. But they're
Jane
just
Fonda
gorgeous.
looking good too.
She's looking good. And in that movie that we just watched,
she
still looks great. So there's this period in the early 90s when Jane and Ted get together and everything's going great. They seem like a really good match. This is from The Lost Tycoon. Both were famous, opinionated, rich, and attractive. Both loved the outdoors. Both had endured difficult childhoods under severe fathers. Neither of them finished college, and both felt profound guilt after the suicide of a parent. So I cannot imagine the trauma that bonded them.
Ooh, you guys want some mouth vomit?
Yeah.
Okay, so one time at his Montana ranch in front of people, here's a quote. Later, Turner, with Fonda by his side, would point out a cabin to visitors and announce that was where the two of them first made love. Where's the vomit sound?
I mean, they're both... Pretty hot.
Okay,
But is that what you want to hear? Like,
yeah,
welcome to our ranch.
Welcome to our ranch. That's where we fuck.
But I think that's the thing. Like, that's Turner.
That's the bone cabin.
I mean, Turner, like, obviously that's super inappropriate, but he was really in love with her, and he was really proud, I think, to have her by his side. Okay, Sandy's joined the party. Turner brought Fonda to CNN executive meetings, and they sent MASH notes to each other.
Not familiar with MASH.
I don't know what that. I think it's like MAS, like those like
Looking it up.
diamond things that you used to make.
No, actually, a MASH note is a letter that expresses infatuation with or gushing appreciation of someone.
I could imagine that'd be kind of annoying. You're at an executive meeting and the boss brings his girlfriend and they're passing love notes back to each other.
Fucking gross. Get a room. Get a room. Remember when we were in Colorado and I had just been broken up with and I went to the hot tub by myself and there was this Swedish couple making out in the hot tub near me and it made me very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They need to think about that. Other people are not in such loving relationships,
true.
okay? So, like, you know, I don't want to see fucking Ted Turner tonguing down Jane Fonda while I eat my spaghetti.
Why are you eating spaghetti in this?
Whatever I'm eating. I'm eating I'm at Ted's Montana Grill eating a bison steak.
So she got him to drink less, diet more, spruce up his wardrobe, buy art for his houses. His mood swings became less pronounced. He yelled less. So Jimmy Carter comes back to the story. Carter smiled as he talked about Turner. Ted has always been very hyper in that he's constantly having visions of grandiose things. He's very relentless. He's always dreaming. Ted told us he was taking sedation to calm himself. When he and Jane got together, Ted became much more relaxed. Ted's newfound tranquility did not translate to business, and he just kind of repeats the family cycle. He thinks his company is too small and wants to expand. Here's a quote that he says, and it's giving big Logan Roy energy. He says, "You need to control everything. You need to be like Rockefeller with Standard Oil. You want to have a hospital and a funeral home. So when people die in the hospital, you move them right over to the funeral home next door. When they're born, you got them. When they're sick, you got them. When you die, you got them." He smiled and added, "The game's over when they break you up. But in the meantime, you play to win. And you know you've won when the government stops you."
Yeah, when the government steps in. That's like, okay.
And this is what's so weird about Ted Turner. It's like, on the one hand, he's this humanitarian. He creates Captain Planet. He's like, guys, we need to save the planet. He's almost socialist. At the same time, he's this hyper-capitalist libertarian. And it's like with these CEOs, I don't think that they have ever built any meaningful belief system that's not paper thin. Like, all they have is, I want that, don't take it from me. So Ted sets out to grow his business by merging with another TV network. He shops around with Paramount, ABC, NBC, but no one wanted to merge or sell with him. At the same time, Time Warner has their eye on Ted's asset. From the failed MGM deal, they had already had 20% of Turner's company, and Ted's starting to feel fenced in by Time Warner and kind of has a meltdown during a speech at the National Press Club luncheon in Washington. This is a fucking insane story. So Ted gets up to speak. He's under pressure because of all these negotiations that are going on behind closed doors. He's worried that Time Warner is going to kind of usurp his assets from under him. When Turner rose to speak, he startled the audience by mentioning a story on clitorectomies that CNN had aired. Like, truly out of left field. Suddenly, he started comparing the mutilation of women to what Jerry Levin was doing to him. He cried out, "You talk about barbaric mutilation? Well, I'm in an angry mood. I'm angry at that too. I'm being clitorized by Time Warner." Jane Fonda is in the audience and she says, "I slid under my seat." In 1996, Ted does end up selling his company to Time Warner and starts working for Jerry Levin. That's this guy. This guy, and we talked about doing an episode on the AOL Time Warner merger, which ends up being known as the worst merger of all time. And this guy, Jerry Levin, is known as the worst CEO of all time for managing that merger. It was at the time called the biggest train wreck in the history of corporate America.
Jerry Levin looks like a cheap knockoff of Ted Turner.
Yeah, he kind of does. He just, oh God.
It looks like the corporate version of a wrestler and his manager.
And we're going to go to Atlanta, and we're going to take over all the TV networks. And that's the bottom line, because Ted Turner said so.
And then they go, yeah.
Look at his
grab
teeth.
hands. God, I hate
The corporate high five.
corporate high fives are so disturbing to me. Like, you see the one with Bob Iger and Rupert Murdoch. Like, they don't know how to touch each other. It's always so awkward. So Jerry takes over his company, and Turner's kind of closed out. And he's upset, particularly that his boss hasn't invited him to his home for dinner or gotten to know him. He soon finds out why. His new role at Time Warner is a figurehead role. It's vice chairman. And he'd have basically no management responsibility. And when AOL took over Time Warner, he was pushed out altogether. And so now he's got it out for Levin. And he kind of pulls a Bob Iger, just going on an absolute public smear campaign, kind of like what Bob Iger did to Bob Chapek. He says that Jerry Levin stabbed him in the back, and the biggest mistake was selling Turner Broadcasting to Time Warner. At an industry speech, again, we talk about the things that, like, no one would ever say this. He goes, I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would actually lose my job, but it happened. My advice to younger people in the room is be real careful who you sell your company to. You know what that's giving?
Yes.
Mike, you remember this?
Never let anyone sign your checks.
Never let anyone sign your checks.
Can I get one last? Turner.
Anyway, he goes on to say that Levin ruined Turner's career and that Levin now owns all I care about, except for his buffalo ranchers out west and his children. Turner recalled one exchange with Levin. He said Levin came up to him and said, Ted, you're my best friend. I said, I'm your best friend? Jerry, I've never been in your home. I'm your best friend. If I'm your best friend, who's your second best friend? The only accent I can do is like borderline New York. I'm your best friend, Jerry. I've never been to your home.
We don't break bread together.
We don't break bread together. I'm your best friend. Who's your second best? Tell me, who's your best friend? That's not what Ted Turner sounds like. At the same time, he also develops another enemy, Rupert Murdoch. I absolutely love this centerfold. It's Ted Turner on one side, a 10, and Rupert Murdoch on the other side.
Look at those neck folds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
Looks like the waves are about to break.
Look, guys, I want you to know that normally I wouldn't be making fun of somebody's appearance, but I think that a democracy destroying megalomaniac like Rupert Murdoch, I'm going to give it a pass. It's okay to make fun of him. Bully billionaires. So this is a article, I think it's by the Vanity Fair. Let me just.
It is by Vanity
Fair. Okay. So he's feuding with Rupert Murdoch. Turner said that Murdoch had to be stopped before he took over the media and used them as a weapon to advance his conservative agenda and his business interests. How do you make peace with a megamaniac? Turner said. In another interview, he called Murdoch a scumbag. I think we called him a scumbag too. Murdoch's paper, this is really fucked up. The New York Post had speculated that publicly that Turner was insane, saying that he was manic depressive and wasn't taking his lithium. Turner says, I want to tell you, I thought about killing him. A smiling Turner said of Murdoch. Again, this is not a one-on-one conversation. He's saying this at a speech at a dinner benefiting the American Museum of the Moving Image, right down the street from where we live. In the papers, he said, I'm insane. So if I did shoot him, I'd get off. I can love him. Turner already challenged Murdoch to one fist fight 13 years earlier in 1983 after the Murdoch's yacht collided with his during a race, causing it to run aground. After the race, a drunken Turner verbally assaulted Murdoch and challenged him to a televised fist fight in Vegas. Like, this is, again, so fucking funny. Like, these men in media think that they're so creative and so unique, but really it's the same thing. You could replace this right now with Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. It's the same story again 30 years later. Anyway, he would challenge him again, accusing Murdoch of being a warmonger for his support of President Bush's invasion of Iraq. Turner said of Murdoch, when you got somebody like that, I don't think there's a spark of human decency in him, except he likes his family, which based on our last episode, I don't even think is true. All right, you ready for almost the second to last piece of corporate gossip?
Yeah, let's hit number 5 hard.
Corporate gossip number 5. As Ted's professional life is unraveling, Queen Jane Fonda throws in the towel, and Ted lives out our collective fantasy, taking revenge on a boss that did you dirty. So if you guys have a boss that screwed you over this year, I just want you to really enjoy the story of revenge. So we've seen it so many times before where the CEOs build these companies and they view these companies as extensions of their own person. So when they're taken away, either by being pushed out or being bought by another company, they literally cannot take it mentally. It's like chopping off your arm. And the Time Warner acquisition was extremely tough on Ted Turner, and his marriage with Jane Fonda starts to deteriorate. A close friend says that Turner is burdened by 3 things. Number 1, an insecurity that can be traced back to his abusive father. 2, a manic, restless nature. And 3, lust. Each of these things is a huge, great bear, the friend says. Turner must wrestle with these 3 bears, and sometimes they overwhelm him. Fonda puts it another way. Why this guy didn't go under psychologically at age 5, I don't know. It scarred him for life. It colors everything. His relationships, his anxieties. And Fonda's also getting frustrated because Ted is incredibly clingy. In the Jane Fonda documentary, he talks about when he's not with the person that he loves, he feels like he's physically shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say that would be codependency.
Mm-hmm.
She says he needs somebody to be there 100% of the time. He thinks that's love. That's not love, that's babysitting. We went in different directions. I grew up. Fonda and Ted divorced in the beginning of 2000. It's the same month he was officially kicked out of Turner Broadcasting by Jerry Levin. So he loses the love of his life and his life's work in the same month. There's the scene where Jane goes to visit Ted at his ranch in her documentary, and he's struggling. Like, you can just tell. I mean, it honestly brought tears to my eyes. Like, they were really in love. He obviously loved her, but like his own trauma got in the way of being a good partner.
Yeah, when she's on her way, she's on the phone with somebody, and she goes, "Yeah, I'm on my way to see my favorite ex-husband." And I was like, "Wow,
I think she was being honest.
I think she was being honest too. It looked like they had a very cute relationship. She was just like, this guy has a lot of demons, and I wasn't able to, be
the person.
Muse,
yeah, not muse.
I still love him.
She wasn't able to give him what he needed, and it didn't sound like anybody could, because what he needed is therapy. So then Ted gets his revenge. Go to the next picture, Mike. I love this picture. So this is Ted grimacing and shaking his fist. So in December 2001, a year after firing Ted Turner, and remember, we said Jerry Levin was one of the worst CEOs. So imagine you get fired and the person that fires you is a fucking doofus poo-poo head. Jerry Levin announces his plan to retire. And remember, CEOs, when they say, I'm going to retire to spend more time with their families, it's almost always bullshit. And here's a great example of that. The press release is boilerplate, I've decided to retire and usher in a new era of leadership. I'm going to pursue my interests, blah, blah, blah. But the true story is so juicy, and it was exposed by Vanity Fair a few months later. Contrary to the public impression that he retired in May of his own accord, Levin was forced out as a result of a verbal attack levied by Turner during a board meeting in the fall of 2001. The magazine said, Turner, the company's vice chairman, banged his fist on the table and yelled, accusing Levin of personally destroying AOL, Time Warner, demoralizing employees, and encouraging rivalry between AOL and Time Warner divisions. Turner was also reported to have reminded the board that the company's share price has declined by half in just 4 months. Keep in mind, at the time, Ted was Time Warner's biggest individual shareholder. He lost $7 billion after the merger, and Turner's outburst was followed by silence. None of the board members present rose to Levin's defense. The unidentified insider with knowledge of the incident told Vanity Fair that Turner's assault was a shocking turning point. It was like realizing the emperor has no clothes. According to the magazine, Turner's direct attack on Levin that day forced AOL, Time Warner's board of directors, to see the obvious. Levin had to be replaced fast. The following month, Levin made a surprise announcement that he was retiring, citing his desire to pursue moral and social issues. That must have felt so good.
Oh, yeah. Cathartic.
Oh, so cathartic. I mean, you fantasize about that, about going up and telling everybody that your boss sucks.
I imagine Ted Turner walked out of that meeting and goes, better than sex.
After this explosion, Ted kind of recedes from public life, and he creates Ted's Montana's Grill a month after Levin's ouster from Time Warner. So are you ready for corporate gossip number 6?
Yeah.
Let's meet up with Ted in present day as David Zaslav is meticulously picking apart his legacy with his hands and licking his little fingies like he's elbow deep in a pile of bison wings.
Bisons have wings?
I don't know. Whatever. Insert Ted Montana Grill food
Bison
here.
ribs would be.
Bison ribs.
Yeah.
So here's a picture of Ted looking at his portrait at the National Portrait Gallery. He seems sad, doesn't he? It's an interesting dichotomy to see the painting and the man looking at the painting. They don't look like the same man. So a lot of what we're going to talk about now is from a 2012 Hollywood Reporter article by Stephen Galloway. It's called Whatever Happened to Ted Turner. So over a decade after his exit from the C-suite, it seems like Ted is just really struggling with what his identity is. Outside of Turner Broadcasting, outside of CNN, he misses a lot, says his daughter, Laura Lee, who's chairman of the Captain Planet Foundation, referring to his role at Time Warner. It was his baby. I think he'd still be there if he hadn't been screwed. He's currently America's #2 private land owner. Actually, interestingly, John Malone, who we'll talk about in the next episode, he's the billionaire that's the largest shareholder in the company that now owns CNN, bought more land than Ted Turner.
You know how much land this guy, Ted Turner owns?
How much?
The equivalent of Delaware.
The state of Delaware.
The state of Delaware.
That's a lot of land.
Oh, the smallest state. Cool.
No, Rhode Island is the...
Sorry.
Atlanta
Is it?
education.
Yeah.
Is it actually Rhode Island?
Yes.
Yeah, so he owns properties, 2 million acres across 22 properties in 9 states and Argentina. Interesting, Argentina. I'm curious.
Yeah, I wonder where there's no
Yeah.
connection there, yeah. It's sad because you can go to the next slide. There he is today. This is from, I think, like a 60 Minutes interview. But he's wearing the same suspenders that he was wearing when Jane Fonda showed up. They're like little fly fishing. They're really cute. It's really sad. A lot of his close friends say that the events changed him. Here's a quote. I don't know if it's because of what happened at Time Warner or just getting older, but he's definitely changed. You know, I think we talk a lot about succession planning and CEOs who have just died without passing over the reins, like Fred DeLuca of Subway. And now I can imagine these guys kind of just hanging out on a yacht and realizing how bleak life is without a company to run, at least in their minds.
Right.
And it makes sense to me now, at least psychologically, why they would die without a succession plan. Turner, you know, he's talking about his mental state, and he says that he sees a psychiatrist friend once a month, but he qualifies. I'm not in therapy. It's just somebody to talk to. He says he has a mild to moderate case of anxiety, but doesn't suffer from depression. That word doesn't exist to me. And again, like, if only some of these people, men, particularly older men, could have the language and not have the fear of grappling with what's in their own mind. In terms of girlfriends, he's got 4 of them. Each of them gets 1 week per month. He misses intimacy, but he recognized, I've been married 3 times, and with my background in baseball, remember, the first rule of the game is 3 strikes and you're out. I regret that I wasn't more successful with my marriages, but it is what it is. Is he lonely? He pauses, maybe a little. He just seems really sad. On his father's suicide, he says the suicide shattered the family, but it's something Ted acknowledges having contemplated too. I thought about it and decided against it in the past, not recently. And today, without Fonda, like, he's alone. You know, he's got his numerous loyalists, 4 girlfriends, a dizzying number of accomplishments, but not being with Jane Fonda anymore is something he deeply regrets. And this has also stayed with me. In this interview, I think it's, again, a 60 Minutes interview, he's constantly blurting things out like, I pushed up against the limits of what human being could do. And look at my accomplishments. I mean, I won the America's Cup. I won the World Series. I think I just won over 1,200 prizes. I have 46 honorary degrees. He's very insecure. One of his biographies says, after he was named something like Times Man of the Year, he held up the magazine in front of several people and said, see, Dad, I made it after all. Isn't that just break your heart?
Yeah, it's disturbing.
In 2018, it was revealed that Turner is suffering from Lewy body dementia. Anyway, all right, you ready for the takeaways?
Yeah, look at
I know the picture that we have in the notes is from Getty Images, so I can't use that, but it is a picture of him, Jane Fonda, and Mark Ruffalo. But the picture I have on the screen is just him.
It's Mark Ruffalo with some fans, actually.
It's the picture I have on the screen is him looking really adoringly at Jane Fonda. And I love that little tie he has. He looks so cute. So, I mean, here's my takeaways. In terms of innovators, Ted is head and shoulders above the rest. Like, to invent something where there wasn't anything before, something that changed the way that people interacted with media forever. And compared to a lot of the people that we have talked about, at least in the reports that I have read, he doesn't seem like a bad boss. I just don't think he was ever taught how to relate to people. I don't think he was able to ever put himself in other people's shoes. I think he was, I mean, I don't know if he was narcissistic or just like completely distracted by his own mental insecurities or what it was. But I think he really struggled with seeing things from other people's perspective. He seems really sullen, which is sad for somebody. I mean, compared to so many of the other people we talk about who have had a net negative impact on the world. Ted Turner, I mean, I don't know. I can't necessarily make an assessment right now whether CNN is good or bad for the world. But regardless, I mean, I truly think that this person has a very good intentions, good heart. I think I think he's a good guy compared to a lot of the people we talk about, and we really talk about the depths of the depths in terms of ethics and morals. He's certainly one of the better ones.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we didn't touch on here is his donation efforts, right?
Philanthropy.
The philanthropy. Ted Turner, early, like, I think it was 1997, he said he was going to donate $1 billion to the UN. And this was before, I think Warren Buffett does like the Robin Hood Project, and Bill Gates, all those people are doing that now, or I guess in the 2010s. But Ted Turner was really the first guy. And he goes up to this UN chief and is basically like, I'm going to give you guys $1 billion. And the guy thought he was joking. Eventually he ponied up and gave them $100 million a year over 10 years.
Well, and just to touch on the climate stuff, I mean, he is up there with Al Gore in terms of people who are very much ahead of the curve with climate change. He's very much a naturalist. He's also into like the depopulation stuff, which I don't know. I guess I just don't know enough about whether or not that's drunk science or not. But, he's talking about ocean rising in like the 80s.
Talking about ocean rising. He's talking about Roe versus Wade being codified. Yeah. And of the time, things that we're dealing with now, drinking water, equal rights for men and women. That's funny. That's an interesting juxtaposition to what he was.
Yeah.
Deforestation. He's described as a billionaire Jeremiah in this article.
Yeah. I hope for him in his remaining years that he's able to like achieve some sense of happiness, some sense of contentment, because I think ultimately his story is really, he's overcome a lot, and it's a pretty wild story. Are you ready to wrap it?
Yeah, let's wrap.
Guys, thank you so much. This has been the premiere episode of season 3 of the Corporate Gossip Podcast. I hope you guys are excited for this season as we are. Maybe you noticed we have some new podcast art. As of the time we're recording it, we haven't actually shot it yet, but we're assuming it's going to be awesome. And, you let us know how you like it. If you want to support the show, you can do so by buying us a coffee. That you can do at the link in our show notes. If you're looking for any of the books we talk about in any of our episodes, you can find that in the bookshop link in our bio, along with the Substack article, which has all the pictures and the articles we read. And you can find us on TikTok at Corporate Gossip Pod. You can email me at becca@nighttoast.com. That's NITETOAST.com, or Adam@nighttoast.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.